Hey everyone, it's Coach Tony. I've been holding off on getting this video out for a little while, although I've been wanting to, only because I know that sometimes what appear to be newer concepts tend to make people a little bit defensive. And while I don't believe this is a newer concept, it seems to be something that the softball community, especially, is a little bit resistant to. So I was giving a lesson the other day. It was at a high school field, a local one, and I saw a group of young ladies and their team practicing. And I saw them warming up using this motion for overhand throw. These are called wrist flips, and they've been in the game for a long time, but it's something that I thought by and large had gone away, at least for overhand throwing. And yes, they exist in pitching too, but that's something I'll kind of talk about a little bit later. So this motion of lopping over the wrist in this fashion made sense once upon a time, I guess. Back when our video was a little bit lower quality, when we couldn't break down motion frame by frame like we can now. But that's not really the case anymore, is it? And so that's kind of what led to my hesitancy in this video, is that people tend to stick with the things that they know, whether it's right or wrong. So what's the right way to throw the ball overhand? And how do we kind of tell the difference in what we should and shouldn't be doing? I've always maintained that the best way for me to be able to learn how to do certain physical motions is to watch the people that do it the best. And in my opinion, some of the best throwers in the world are football quarterbacks, right? So here's some slow motion video of three football quarterbacks that I consider actually very good, two of which happen to be the hardest throwers, or some of the hardest throwers that have ever played in the game, and probably all going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. You notice that there's no lopping over the wrist. So you might say, well, that's a football. The starting position is a little bit different. So let's look at some baseball. You guys know who this guy is. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer when he decides to retire. In my humble opinion, baseball pitchers are the hardest, most efficient throwers in the world because they have to be. So you may say, well, that's a pitcher. So let's take a look at some other positional players. Here's a pretty popular infielder and an outfielder. That was a little too fast. Here's a slow motion one of somebody who happens to have an absolute cannon for an arm. The two things that I would extract from these videos is that there is no lopping over the wrist, but there is one thing that they all seem to have in common, right? And just in case you think there's a difference between throwing a softball and a baseball, here's a softball player. The mechanics are the same for overhand throwing, regardless of what you're throwing or how you're trying or what position you're trying to throw from. Fact of the matter is, in the 10 plus years that I've been coaching, I don't know of any player that throws the ball with any amount of velocity or accuracy that does the whole wrist lop over motion. The one thing they do all have in common is that turning over the wrist motion that you saw in every single person that was throwing in all of the videos that I've shown you. That's called pronation. And that is what we should be teaching players to throw. And believe it or not, even if we don't teach it, they'll eventually be doing it. Why? Because as I've always maintained, if you have enough discipline and diligence and you practice, the body is naturally going to gravitate towards the motion that is most economic, most efficient, and better for it. So that brings us back to pitching, because it's not just overhand throwing where people are being taught to do the whole wrist flip. It's in pitching as well. This wrist isolation drill that you see here is probably taught to the vast majority of beginning pitchers in rec and CYO leagues and things of that nature. And it's all over the place, and a primary reason why you can't learn how to coach, at least not entirely, from watching YouTube videos. I have so many young ladies come to me, and after they've done their overhand warm-up, which, by the way, I've had to correct several of which recently, and even after just a couple of minutes of showing them the motion of pronation, their throws improve significantly, both in power and accuracy. But typically speaking, they go from that overhand warm-up throwing motion to one of these things, these wrist flips. And there's different variations. I've seen young ladies go from standing sideways to standing straight forward to all sorts of things. But the fact of the matter is it boils down to just this isolation of the wrist bending forward like this. There are so many of these drills online, it's quite frankly really frustrating. Because at this point in time, how are we still teaching young ladies to do this to pitch. Now, the wrist flip is not the only thing wrong with what this coach is doing here. There, we could break down the video about posture and how the feet are positioned and all those sorts of things, but we'll focus on that a little later. For right now, we're just focusing on the motion of the wrist flip and why it has nothing to do with pitching, just like it has nothing to do with overhand throwing. Funny thing is, if you actually watch, she actually does turn over. She does commit the internal rotation after having done the previous incorrect movements. And just like I had mentioned previously with overhand throwing, with enough practice and enough repetition and enough diligence, the body's going to naturally go a certain direction because the body's only built certain ways. And if you've taken a lesson from me, you know that I explained the fact that there's certain things that the body tends to gravitate towards. So even these people that believe they're doing certain things, once they get past a certain point, you'll see that their motion tends to change. And one of the things I always ask my young ladies when we first start is, have you ever taken video of yourself, slow motion video of you pitching? And the parents as well. And more often than not, the answer to that is no. And that kind of confuses me, because how do you know what it is you're doing if you've never actually seen yourself do it? And I also challenge my students and parents to go and look for yourself. There's tons of slow motion video out there of high-end pitchers, both professional as well as former retired pitchers, and watch what they're actually doing. Don't listen necessarily to what they say, because as we all know, there are things that people do that they don't know that they're doing, but actually watch slow motion video of what the actual motion looks like when they're doing it full speed. This video is of a young lady that came to me relatively recently after having gone to several pitching lessons with the standard wrist flip type pitcher coach. And as you see, even her, even though she's trying to do the whole hello elbow motion, even her motion has started to evolve. And I've seen this in so many young ladies as they make their journey through pitching. And here are a couple of the college pitchers that I was coaching at my time at the university. All of these were intakes, so basically it's the first time that I'd seen any of them and taken the slow motion video. Again, most of them had no idea what they looked like actually pitching. But as you see, every single one of them does the same thing. They do have that rotational aspect of their arm. There is no pushing. There is no wrist flip. The point to all this, there is absolutely no reason to teach wrist flips, whether that be to throw overhand or throw underhand. So let's stop doing it.